The following lesson is linked to Learning Outcome 2, Reading and Viewing. It addresses the assessment standard that requires learners to recognize how language and images may reflect and shape values and attitudes. Learners should be able to recognize the nature of bias, prejudice, and discrimination in texts.
Hello and welcome. So far in this lesson, we've looked at who gets quoted in newspaper articles and how this impacts on the understanding that the reader has on events. You may think that quotations are objective because the person's exact words are being used. However, there are many ways in which quotations can be distorted. In some ways, it's good to be quoted in a newspaper article. When you are quoted, you can give your side of the story, and your exact words are used. On the other hand, your words could be taken out of context, and only part of what you said may be reported. Sometimes people don't want their names reported in the newspaper. They might be telling the journalist confidential information, and they might want to remain anonymous. When the person's name or source of information is not given, the article is weakened. For all readers know, the journalist might simply be repeating rumors and then attributing them to an anonymous source. If you read a newspaper article about something unusual or strange that has happened, where no specific source of information is quoted, you could ask yourself, is this an urban legend? An urban legend is a modern folk tale. These are stories that supposedly happened to the friend of a friend. Here's an example of an urban legend. A woman goes on holiday to the Kruger Park and is bitten on the neck by a spider. A rather nasty red swelling develops, but she ignores it and carries on with her holiday. A couple of weeks later, she is lying in the bath when the bite bursts open and a whole lot of tiny baby spiders crawl out. Well, that's just disgusting, but it's an excellent example of an urban legend. It's the kind of story we tell one another, or we hear that it might have happened to your auntie's neighbor's cousin's dentist. But if we try to pin down the source of the information to an individual, we battle. Who was the woman? Why was she not quoted? From the story I told you, you couldn't work out the answers to these questions. The fact that you can't answer them suggests that this event may not have happened, and that in fact it might be an urban legend. It's one thing if you're simply telling stories like these at a party, but it's a completely different matter if a newspaper prints them without checking to see if the events actually did occur. Well, maybe now you're wondering, what does this have to do with reading between the lines and who is quoted? Well, this is why. It's important to work out where information comes from if you're going to believe it to be true. Just because something is in print does not mean that it's true. Now imagine if the same story about the woman being bitten by the spider began with this introduction. Mr. Piet Botha, Public Relations Officer of the Kruger National Park, warns guests to be careful of spiders after a woman is bitten on the neck. Do you think the story would be more believable now? Here, a responsible person is being quoted. His name is given, and as the Public Relations Officer, he certainly would not tell a story like this if it weren't true. Now we have a credible source, so the story is much more believable. So, why are stories printed that don't have reliable sources? To answer this, let's look at this example. Imagine if you saw this headline: Defrosted Dog. A story with this headline did appear in the Sunday Times, however, and the story went on to describe how the dog was placed in a microwave. Now, no people were quoted and no other names were given. Maybe you have even heard a version of this story before, or maybe someone has told you that a friend of a friend's cousin's plumber actually did this. Well, this is a horrifying story, assuming, of course, that it actually happened. But people read things like this because they are sensational. Sensationalism is writing that tries to cause intense feelings in the reader. But if some of these stories aren't true or can't be vouched for by credible or reliable witnesses, then why do newspapers print them? Why are urban legends reported in the newspaper? According to Arthur Goldstuck, an expert on urban legends, journalists are often in such a hurry to print a sensational story that even though they know that it may have holes in it, they don't check all the facts properly. In other cases, the story might have been deliberately leaked to the press. Here's an example that appeared in the newspaper at the same time as the film Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was released. Do you think that a story like this one would have a source? Mutant Turtle movie is true. Monster turtles have been found in the sewers of New York as a horror film about shell-backed mutants sweeps America. How convenient! Just when a movie about mutant turtles is about to be released, the newspaper prints a story about how there are actually real-life monster turtles in the sewers of New York. In this case, the film studio might have leaked this story to the newspapers to get people talking about monster turtles. This would help add to the hype surrounding their film, as people would think, so maybe these creatures do exist. So now we can see that it's important that an article quotes an official source for it to be believable. Let's recap this lesson. Urban legends can be quite entertaining. We've all heard about someone biting into a chicken burger only to find that they're eating a rat. Or maybe you've heard the one about the burglar who sends a couple theatre tickets so that he knows exactly when they'll be out and he can go ahead and burgle them. These stories are not necessarily true, but they are told as if they are, and sometimes even journalists fall for them and print them in the paper. To tell if something is true, a critical reader always asks, can I prove that this happened? Is an eyewitness quoted? And lastly, is the person being quoted reliable? Asking yourself these questions when you come across a story that is sensational or too strange to be true will help you to distinguish between fact or fiction. Well, that brings us to the end of this block on reading between the lines. And after this, I think you will find that there is much more to reading than initially meets the eye. Goodbye.